Welcome to the How to Fish podcast presented by Tailored Tackle. Tailored Tackle makes premium fishing kits, rod and reel combos, and fishing line to give you comprehensive packages to either learn how to fish or to get better at fishing, whether that's a specific species or region. So we specialize in a bunch of different stuff. We've got trout kits, bass kits, walleye kits, general freshwater, surf fishing kits, and then all the rods and reels to match with those and the right line to put on them. So we kind of create a total package, and a lot of times you can get everything you need to get started fishing for under about $200. So check us out at www.tailoredtackle.com, or just check out the show notes. We've got links in there. So let's get started on today's episode. I'm your host, Ed Hitchcock. I'm the owner of Tailored Tackle, and we are going to do an advanced episode on the slip bobber. Now, I believe that the slip bobber is the most versatile fishing rig in freshwater, and so therefore I consider it to be the best fishing rig in freshwater. Now, I want you to make sure that you're thinking about this in terms of live bait, because while there are some options to put artificials underneath a slip bobber, it's primarily used for fishing with live bait. So we're going to dive into this. I'm going to tell you exactly what the rig is made up of and how to use the rig, as well as, why we're using it, what baits we're using, and what are the advantages, what are the cons, and how you can really take this rig and put it into practice. Talking about rigs is always a little difficult on a podcast because you can't physically see it. The good news is that we have a free resource library on our website. If you go to our website, which I gave you the address earlier, it's tailoredtackle.com, and you go to our fishing resources library, you can get access to all of our ebooks for free. And so the slip bobber rig is in our freshwater kit, our trout kit, and our walleye kit. So you can learn how to use the slip bobber rig in the ebooks for any of those kits, because what we basically do is all of the books that we put in the kits for customers, we also make them free online. And so whenever I'm talking about like visual things like rigs and stuff, you can always go and download any of our ebooks for free and take a look and see like visually what I'm talking about. So let's get right into the rig itself. The beauty behind the slip bobber, and I call it a rig because there's kind of a way you rig it up. It's not just a bobber that you throw on there. And that's why it's so important, is if you're familiar with bobber fishing, you typically use a clip bobber when you're just getting started. And those are those ones where it's kind of red on the bottom, white on the top. They're a circle, they're an orb, and you push the button down and you thread your line through the bottom hook, and then you thread your line through the top hook. And that cinches the bobber down on your line, but the bobber can't move anywhere. So wherever you cinch it on, that's the depth it's going to be at. And you can't really get deeper than 3 to 4 feet, because then you wouldn't be able to cast it out. So what a slip bobber is it's one of those kind of vertical bobbers. It's kind of like an obelisk in a way. And then it's got 2 tubes, 1 tube all the way through it, but 2 tubes poking out from the bottom and the top that you get to thread your line through. And so that allows the bobber to go up and down on your line. And then you've got a slip tie, which is like this little pre-made tie that you thread on, that stops the bobber. So you can put that tie anywhere on your line and set the depth and cast it out, and the slip bobber will stop at that point in the line. So these are kind of the parts that go with it that you would need, and we have them in all of our kits, but it's pretty much just terminal tackle, a slip float, and a slip tie. So you would start by threading the slip tie onto your line, and these come pre-rigged. So they're like a little knot on a piece of plastic tube, and you just slide the tube up on your line, then you slide the pre-made knot off, and then you cinch the knot down. Don't do it too tight, because that will kind of get it stuck on the line. You want to do it like just tight enough so it moves around, but not so tight that it would get stuck. So you put your slip tie on, and then you thread a slip bobber bead, which should come with the packet of slip ties. And so then you thread the little bead on, and that allows the slip bobber to stop on the tie without having the tie go through the slip bobber, because the tie, sometimes it'll just stop, but a lot of times after a lot of use, it won't stop the bobber anymore. And so you need that bead right there to keep the chafing down and not have the bobber slip right through it. So then you put on the slip bobber, you thread that through, and then you tie a hook onto your line. Now you got to keep this in mind, is that you don't want to just have a hook and then the bobber directly to it, because then the bobber will always fall down onto the hook and put pressure on your live bait, and you'll lose a lot of live bait like that. So what you want to do is about 1 foot to 2 feet up from the hook, you put a split shot sinker, and this will probably be like a small to medium sized sinker. And that'll stop the bobber from going down. So in recap, you've got the slip tie, you've got the slip tie bead or slip bobber bead, you've got the slip bobber, then you've got the weight that you put on afterwards, and then the hook. And what's awesome about this is that from the weight on up, you don't need to change anything on this if you want to start using different sized hooks, which you would use for different sized baits. So this slip bobber will just kind of work. Now, just keep in mind with the weight at the bottom, you want to make sure it's big enough so that the bobber stands upright. But you don't want it to be so heavy that the bobber submerges too much, or so light that the bobber just kind of sits on its side when you've got the slip tie on and the bait's in the water. And so that's the general makeup of a slip bobber. Again, you should go look at our books, because we show the exact diagram on how to do this. But once you do it once, it'll pretty much be ingrained, because there's how many moving pieces? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 moving pieces, and they have to go in a specific order, or it's very obvious that it doesn't work. So you're going to see that, and you only have to tie one thing. The rest of it, you just slide right on. So once you do it one time, you'll always be able to remember it. It's not like learning a knot and having to practice it a million times. So that's the slip bobber rig. Now, why is this so great? Again, this is what I'm talking about, is that it allows you to bobber fish at any depth. And bobber fishing is great, not only because you can see the bite indication, but what's really important is that you're setting your bait to a specific depth. And so positioning your live bait in the water column is a very important factor. So if you were to fish, let's say in 15 feet of water, where there's always, and if you're in freshwater, there's those 15 feet is typically where you're going to see like a weed line transition and a lot of fish hanging out, and there's pike and there's bass and there's panfish and maybe there's walleye edged up and there's perch. In that depth, if you were to go and put on bait and a clip-on bobber and just throw it out there, the max depth it could get to is like 3 to 4 feet, because the bobber can't move up and down. And if the bite is super fast, let's say it's super aggressive, yeah, sure, you can just throw a minnow out and you can jig it, or you can free line it back or whatever. But a lot of times, in a lot of these situations, the bite's not crazy, right? The bite's not this incredible time where every time you go out, all you got to do is just cast some live bait and bring it back, and you're going to get an aggressive fish bite. The majority of the time, it's going to be more subtle. And so what's great about a slip float is that you can pinpoint exactly where to put your bait, and you can still add movement to it. Albeit it won't be as fast as if you were jigging, but you can still retrieve it back and pause and jig it up and down and things like that. But the beauty of it is that you can keep your bait exactly where you need it to be. So a lot of times the strike zone, which I like to call it, is it's 1 foot off the bottom. It usually starts 1 foot off the bottom, and then it goes up by 2 feet. So it's like the bottom 3 feet of the water column, but really lift it up a foot because it's not actually on the bottom. So like that strike zone is an important place to consistently put your bait. And if you can keep it there at all times, like when you're jigging or you're casting lures or whatever you're doing, you're kind of going in and out of that strike zone. You're using the movement to kind of cover that strike zone. And if the fish are aggressively biting, they'll go in and out of the strike zone and they'll hit it and whatever. But if the fishing isn't super aggressive, the slip bobber is great because it can stay in that zone no matter what you do. Because it's consistently positioned there, so you can set your depth to that strike zone. And then if you were to switch over to, let's say, 30 feet in depth, you could move your slip tie back farther and still set it at 27 feet versus out of the 30 feet, so that it's staying in that strike zone. And you can even go even shallower, and you can go as shallow as all the way up to wherever you put your weight. And so the slip bobber is great. And now I'm saying these things like aggressive versus non-aggressive, meaning like, a fast moving lure or a jigged live bait could go really well when the bite is aggressive. That's true, and you're probably going to be more efficient. But the thing is that even if you use a slip bobber on an aggressive bite, it's still going to be an aggressive bite. So it really kind of hedges your bets. Let's say you were going to go fish for the first time in a freshwater lake. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know if the bite is aggressive or not. You know that if you throw a slip bobber out in the strike zone and there are fish there, whether they're aggressive or not, you're giving it a really good opportunity. And so I fish aggressively with lures and jigging live bait because it's fun. And I also do it when the bite is so good that it's more efficient, or for some species like bass, it's more efficient. But the beauty of a slip bobber is that everything eats live bait. And if you can put it right where the fish are, whether they're aggressive or not, you're going to have a great shot at catching fish. And so it's just a catch-all go-to where, is it the most efficient or the most effective for every single circumstance? No, it's not. But will it work in almost every single circumstance and work really well, especially when fish aren't biting? Yes. So that's what I want to default to all the time. It's a perfect hedge when I don't know exactly what I'm doing. And then even when I do, a lot of times it's just the most effective thing. I mean, imagine this. You take an animal that they want to eat, a fish that they want to eat. So whether that's a leech or a worm or a bait fish, and they're consistently feeding on that, and you can put it directly in their zone where they're swimming and where they're feeding and present it perfectly in front of them for a long period of time, it's just a good method. So how do we do that, right? We've tied it up and we've listened to Ed preach now about how effective it is and why it's so good. How would we actually go and do that? And so first you have to get out there and set your depth. So you do that before you put the bait on, because you need enough weight to kind of get down there and see. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to strip the slip tie back on the line until your bait gets down to the bottom, not your bait, but like your weight on it, the weight in the hook underneath the slip float. You do it right off the side and you move that slip tie back until it gets to the bottom. And you'll know it gets to the bottom because it'll be slack. So like it won't keep dropping down. It'll just go slack. A really fast way to do this, because you're using this rig all the time and you're switching depths all the time when you're fishing for walleye. So we have one of these in our walleye kit and in our ice fishing kit, is a weighted depth finder. It's not an electronic depth finder. It's a heavy, like 1/2 ounce weight that you clip onto your hook, and then you drop that down and that'll bring it down really fast. And it'll also keep your hook directly on the bottom versus the weight. But it doesn't really matter how you get it down. You just want to get it down to the bottom and then move your slip tie down right where it stops being slack. And you know that your slip tie and your float are set to the absolute bottom, meaning wherever the weight is, whether that's your weight a foot up on your line or that's the depth finder weight that you clipped on, then you have to move the slip tie up a couple more feet to get your bait in the strike zone. So if I were to just drop it down with a split shot sinker attached, that's a foot away from my hook, and I found the bottom, I moved my slip tie down so I know I'm exactly on the bottom where the slip tie stops at the top of the bobber, but the bobber's not standing upright. Then I know that my hook is a foot away from that weight, which is on the bottom. And then I also want to be about a foot up off the bottom. So I want to put my hook a foot off the bottom. I would move my slip tie up 2 feet, right? Because the hook's not the one on the bottom. The weight's the one on the bottom. And then if I were to use a depth finder, I would clip that on, drop it down, hit the bottom, make sure I'm set at full bottom. And then I know that the depth finder weight is only attached to my hook. So I would only move the slip tie up 1 foot to be a foot off the bottom, right? Because the weight on the line isn't what's on the bottom with a foot leader. The weight itself that I clipped onto the hook is on the bottom. Sorry, I didn't mean to be tongue-tied and make that confusing. The idea here is that you want to set your bait in a strike zone or somewhere relative in the water column based on the species that you're going after. Most of the time, it's going to be a couple feet off the bottom. I would say 80% of your average situations are going to be a couple feet off the bottom. So that's how you set your depth. Then what you do is you put on the bait of your choice. If it is a bigger bait, you're going to want to use a bigger weight on your split shot, because here's another concept that's important to understand is if you are using minnows or really lively leeches, you want them to be alive and calling fish. But if you've ever watched like an aquarium or you've seen like a school of minnows and bigger fish sitting around, you'll be like, why aren't they just going and eating those minnows? They're right in front of them. And that's because when a minnow is very lively, it's not worth the energy expenditure that it would take to go chase down that minnow versus just waiting for one that's not paying attention or is a little wounded or whatever. And so you want your minnow to be lively, but you don't want it so lively that it continually escapes the fish you're trying to catch. And I've seen this all the time when I do my underwater camera, when I'm ice fishing. You'd be so surprised. Like, fish miss all the time on your bait, especially when they're being lethargic, which is typically when you're going to use a slip bobber rig. And so when they're lethargic like that, they'll maybe make a pass at it once or twice if that minnow's going crazy. But if they don't get it right away, they'll just move on. They'll be like, ugh, it's not worth the energy. So the weight is actually really important because you don't want that bait to go too far or move your bobber around or whatever it's doing down there, because that minnow is going to be moving too fast for a lethargic bite. So you actually, like, the weight serves 2 purposes. It serves the purpose of keeping the bobber upright for bite indication, but it also keeps your minnow or leech in the game so that it's not swimming away from the fish all the time. And it's not really with leeches that much. It's much more with bait. But yeah, then it keeps them kind of spiraling in like a 1 foot diameter, because your leader between, not your leader, but you know what I'm talking about, the foot between the hook and the weight is only a foot. And so they kind of swim around in a foot and they don't make it very far. Whereas if you don't put on a weight and you put like a 3 to 4 inch shiner minnow and that thing's crazy, your bobber could be going left and right. And if a walleye were to come up to bite it, it might dodge it. Because I see it happen all the time ice fishing. So it happens in open freshwater fishing too. Okay. So what bait are we putting on there? And then that determines what hook size you're using. And so I would use, Yeah, because it's all kind of like a big batch. And we're going to get into this later at some point about picking the right hooks for the right fish. But just know that, like, you use bigger bait to catch bigger fish, and bigger hooks need to be used with bigger bait. And so they all kind of go together. But that doesn't mean that you would, if you were using small bait for a big fish, you wouldn't use a giant hook. So all that being said, I like to use octopus hooks for mid-sized minnows and leeches. I like to use circle hooks for large minnows. And then I like to use bait holder hooks for worms. Those are three. We have all those in our in pretty much like all of our fishing kits. We have like a combination of those. And then we have a whole fishing hook kit that has like every single hook that I use in all the right sizes. Anyways, I would match the hook to the size of the minnow, or the bait. So if I were to use like a crappie minnow, I would use a number 6 octopus hook, and I would also use that for like a regular leech. If I were to use a bigger minnow, like a big sucker minnow, or a really big shiner minnow or something like that, I would use a circle hook, and that would be kind of in size like 2/0, from 1 to 2/0. If this doesn't make sense to you, like, don't worry about it. We'll come up with it later, but you'll just kind of be able to eye hooks and like know. And then for like a bait holder hook, I would use a number 6 bait holder hook for worms if I'm using half a worm, or I'd use like a number 1 or a number 2 for a full worm on a bait holder hook. So it's really only like 3 or 4 different hooks that I use on a slip bobber rig. And then when I want to switch through all those different baits, like basically every live bait in freshwater that you would use on average, it takes like 3 different hooks, and I just like, or 4 different hooks, and I just switch the hooks out. But you can keep the whole slip bobber rig all rigged up. So that is how the rig is set up. That is how to implement the rig. Let's talk about some strategies. So when I am fishing with this rig, what I really like is wind, but not a huge amount of wind. And so there's a time, there's like a single time where this rig is really not good, is when you have swells or waves over like a foot or 2, which can definitely happen on big water and on stormy days, because it'll make it impossible to tell whether or not the bite is happening. And it also will keep moving your bait like 2 to 3 feet up away from the strike zone. And so like the slip bobber is going to be all over the place. It doesn't mean you can't use it, and I've done it plenty of times. It's just not the most effective. And so, but what's really good is having a light chop, meaning like, I don't know, smaller waves with a good wind. And that is great because it moves your bait for you. So as you can tell with bobber fishing, you're typically not actively working the rig. The rig is sitting there and waiting. And if you reel up to move it, you can do that, and you can jig it up and down a little bit. But that changes the depth of where it's at, and it's a little bit more aggressive. But what's great is that if you've got some wind, the wind will slowly, gradually move the slip bobber, which will move your bait. And then the slip bobber will cover water at a very slow pace. So the minnow or the bait or whatever isn't leaving the strike zone that you wanted to set it at, but it can cover like, I don't know, in 10 minutes, maybe like 50 yards, which is great because you do still want to cover a lot of water and open up more opportunities to get your bait in front of fish. But a lot of times when you're using a slip bobber, you don't want to do it aggressively, which is hard to create artificially. So when there's a good wind, I would say probably like a less than 10 mile per hour wind, and some light chop in the water, that'll really move your bait back and forth and then jig it kind of subtly. The conditions will. You're not jigging it. Now you can get more aggressive with it. And I like to get more aggressive with it when the water is slack. So let's say there's no wind, and it's totally flat and the bobber can't move on its own. Then I'm casting it a lot more, retrieving it back a lot quicker. And then I'm also like gradually reeling it in every, maybe 10, 15 seconds to just reposition it somewhere and get it in front of another thing. So let's talk a little bit about casting it, as well as kind of working it back and then setting the hook, because it's tricky. With casting, you just have to make sure that you don't have too much leader. You're not going to whip this like an artificial bait, because it's going to be great because you have a lot of weight and bulk on there to get your casts out farther. That's why it's a big help to do this over just free lining something. So casting it, though, you still have to be careful, because I've seen it countless times where you just whip your bait right off. And I've done it myself too, because you're just whipping something with a lot of weight on top and then your bait is on the bottom and it gets like a whiplash effect. So you can chuck it out there pretty far and you can get some distance, but you don't really want to do that. You don't want to cast it like an artificial bait, because you've got a really high chance of losing the bait, but also you have to keep your eye on this. And especially if there's some chop or something like this, you really don't want it going more than 50 yards away from you, because you won't be able to see it, and you'll also not be able to set the hook very effectively, which I'll get to in a little bit. So my strategy with it is, in a perfect scenario, I would drop it maybe 10 yards away from my boat or my dock, and then the wind would be carrying it away. And once it hits the bottom and I'm feeling good about where it's at, I would open my bail up and I would gradually let the bobber go out until it gets to about, I'd say maybe 40, 50 yards. That's kind of the maximum for you to be able to see where the bobber's at. And it doesn't mean that you wouldn't be able to like pinpoint where it is generally. It's that you're going to have to be able to read the bite on the slit bobber, which I'm going to get into when I talk about setting the hook. So that's kind of the game plan, is to typically kind of, if all the conditions are great, cast it 10 yards in front of you. You don't even have to do that. You can just drop it down, especially if you're on a boat, and let the wind take it back. But if I'm on a dock, I'm definitely casting at least 10 yards. But I'm not whipping. And the thing too is that you've got to understand your lake maps. So if you don't already have it, you should get Navionics or FishBrain and make sure that you understand the depth in which you're fishing, because 50 yards on water doesn't necessarily mean it's 50 yards of a 15-foot depth the whole time. Most of the time, the depths change. So you have to keep that in mind too. The depths changing is really kind of usually what restricts how far you go. And so what's awesome about our smartphones is if you have Navionics or you have the FishBrain app, you can take a look at it and it'll pinpoint where you are relative to the rest of the lake map. And then you'll know generally, okay, like there's a drop off in about 40 yards from where I'm standing and casting right now. I really don't want to go past 40 yards because it's pointless, because my bait's going to be sitting halfway through the water column and not right off the bottom. So that's how we're thinking about casting, is that we don't want to chuck it too far where we can't see it. We also want to make sure it's staying in a general proximity to us, because we don't want it to be traveling into a depth that we're not set to. And we don't want to whip the bait off. So that's kind of casting concepts. Let's talk a little bit about bite indication and the hook set. This is going to be a little bit trickier And this is where I've seen a lot of fish missed. A lot of my like family fishing and group fishing and, like annual fish camp trips are with a lot of people, and we're all fishing slip bobbers because it's tough to fish aggressively with a boat of like 10 people on it. And so where things usually go awry is the hook set, because this is where things get a little bit more tricky because it depends on the species you're going after. It also, depends on whether you're harvesting the fish you're catching or you're trying to release them. So let's go through the situation. You have casted out 10 yards. Great. Your bobber's set to 15, a depth of 15 feet, meaning that let's say it's 16, 17 feet in total. You're a foot or two off the bottom. It's pretty much flat for the next 30 yards. You got a great chop. Your bobber's moving, but very slowly. You're covering water, gets to about 20 yards, and you see a bite, meaning the bobber goes up and down lightly. This is not going to be like bass fishing. You are not setting the hook right away. The presentation that we're doing is something for lethargic and aggressive fish. So it doesn't mean that the fish doesn't just take it right away and drive the bobber down. I see it all the time when fish are aggressive, but the majority of the time that you're fishing this, the fish aren't very aggressive. And they're also hitting live bait, which is something that is a little trickier for a fish than, maybe just like hitting a worm or something. Anyways, you're going to see that bobber dip a little bit. It'll bounce up and down. You want to wait till the bobber is fully submerged 1 to 2 feet down under the water and count to, I would say, 5 if it's fully submerged. Generally, the timing would be if you see your bobber start to go down, I would probably set the hook within 10 seconds of it starting to go down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Like that's the cadence that I would wait, but it also kind of depends on the species. And if you're keeping it or not. I would only wait up to maybe 3 or 4 seconds if I'm planning to release the fish, because the longer you wait, the longer the time it gives the fish to go and swallow the bait, and then it's really tough to release them. But if I'm keeping the majority of the fish that I'm catching, then I want to absolutely make sure that that fish is on the hook, like it has taken the bait. And that's the luxury of a slip bobber, is that you've got 5 to 10 seconds to let him take the bait, because there's no tension or pressure on the other end of it. So they don't know that they've got something in their mouth because it's a slip bobber. And so, yeah, maybe there's a little bit of pressure and tension from the bobber going down, but there's really not much. So it's not like you were casting a crankbait and then you got a hit and then they felt that hit. And so you've got to respond quickly and set the hook on them. They just took the bait and they're running with it. So you've got to, you can give them some time. And a lot of species, pretty much all of them at some point in time, go and they suck something in to like kind of kill it and stun it. And then they open it back out to make sure they know what it is. And then they suck it back in and then they swallow it. And so I see that all the time with panfish. I see pike do it where they'll grab the bait, they'll go, and then they'll go and they'll swim for a little while because they've done the like stunning and killing. It's stuck in their front teeth, and then they'll open their mouth up so that they can suck it back in and just swallow it directly. So a lot of fish do that. Walleye do that. Like bass don't really do it that much. They're just like bucket mouth, take something, keep going. But a lot of fish suck in, suck out, suck in, and then you're good. So especially if you're fishing multi-species, I mean, what's the risk in just waiting and giving it a little bit of time? The only risk is that they swallow the hook. So you want to keep it to 3 to 5 seconds if you're releasing, because otherwise you're going to have a lot of dead fish on your hands. So that's how much time you wait. Now, I wanted to caveat this a little bit with panfish, which I'll do later when we talk about the artificials. But like when you're fishing really small fish, sometimes they won't be able to take the whole slip bobber down. And if that's the situation, give it 5 to 10 seconds of the bobber going up and down and moving around and stuff, and then set the hook. Not all species, especially panfish and perch, those guys a lot of times won't be able to fully take a slip bobber down, and they also just don't have that agenda. They're not taking something and darting down or darting left or right. They're usually just kind of like taking that little feed in and then just kind of sitting around and being like, okay, is there more zooplankton around here? They're not cruising. So that is when to set the hook. Now, how to set the hook. This again is not like a regular lure, because you've got all of this slack line for letting them take it. So when you see that bobber going down, you want to make sure your bail is open so that you can let them take it without any pressure. And so they're just going to take that bait. You're going to lose some line. It's going to go slack, and bobber's going to go down. It's down 2 to 3 feet. It's been 10 seconds. Now it's time to set the hook. The problem is that you can't set the hook with all of that slack line, because you won't actually set the hook into the fish's mouth. You'll just pull a bunch of line and then maybe give it a flicker of resistance, and they'll spook and they'll maybe spit it out. I've seen a lot of fish not go into the net because somebody messed up the hook set. And so there's 2 issues. The first one is the slack line. You cannot have slack line when you set the hook. You'll almost lose the fish like 80-90% of the time. You also can't set the hook too hard, which we all like to call horsing it. And I've seen this many times where guys and gals get real excited. They pull in their slack line and they just rip it like they're bass fishing. And the thing is that like you're not always fishing for bass, and they might not have. You can just rip the bait right out of their mouth, because you got to understand that if you present a bait in a non-aggressive fashion, the fish typically don't eat it in an aggressive fashion. So if you're fishing aggressive baits, fish are feeding on them aggressively. Well, a lot of times they just set the hook for you when they're feeding aggressively. But if you kind of give them a meal on a platter and then they kind of grab it and they don't, they're just being lethargic. They might swallow it. They might not. They might be chomping at it a little bit. They might be playing around with it. You can very easily, if you overset that hook, just rip a fish out that wasn't totally in its mouth. Like the hook wasn't totally in the fish's mouth. So this part is kind of an art. The rest of it has been kind of a science, but the hook set is an art. So bobber's down. It's been 10 seconds. You're going to slowly reel in all of your line that is slack until you're about to get to that point where there is tension. And once you get to that point, your rod tip should be maybe at your waist level, a little bit higher. I like to be about 45 degrees up from my waist. And then when I set that hook, my bail is closed, the line is taut, there's no slack, but I haven't touched on the fish at all. I've just gradually gotten to that point where the line is taut. And then I set my hook from going from 45 degrees to 90 degrees. So I'm basically just going from, let's say my reel is at my chest level. I'm taking it from my chest level to my shoulder. So your waist is at 0. Your rod, before you set it, is at 45 degrees. And then 90 degrees is the top of your shoulder. So take it from chest to shoulder, basically moving your rod tip at the other end, maybe 2 to 3 feet tops. You do not need to rip like a 5 to 6 foot hook set. I've seen so many fish get lost that way. But you also can't be timid about it. You can't go and set the hook lightly and too early and there's slack in the line and it's basically like giving the fish a free pass to change its mind. So that is the hook set. So in practice, that's how we're doing it. Now, I told you I'd touch on artificials and when to use artificials under a slit bobber. I only recommend doing this for panfish, so crappie and bluegill and sunfish. And That's because the artificials themselves are small enough. So most artificials you don't want to put under a slip float because they're too big for it. You're going to get tangled up. You're going to get all sorts of problems. You shouldn't put a crankbait under it. You shouldn't put any kind of lure under it. That's going to make things really hard. But you can put like soft plastics and marabou jigs, any kind of like jig type thing with a smaller profile, you can put underneath a slip float because that's not going to get tangled up and that's not going to get all messed up by the bobber itself. And what's great about adding a slip float to your panfish / crappie jigs and grubs, when you're working all of those like micro and smaller soft plastics that are used for panfish, the slip bobber is great because it puts you in their strike zone, which is going to be weird a lot of the times. So a lot of times you're going to be fishing in heavy weeds where like there'll be weeds from, let's say you're in 10 feet of water and you want to fish a lure for crappie that's under the dock, and those weeds go up to 5 feet and then none above that, and the crappie are right at 5 to 6 feet, but you want to throw a lure in there. You either have to fish it very fast in that top part of the water column, or you got to spend half your time taking the weeds off. And so what's great is that you can fish it slower too if you wanted to. So you can fish it just as fast or just as slow as you want to. But it's a great trick to use like those marabou jigs and those small soft plastics on a jig underneath your slip bobber for panfish or crappie, because you can pinpoint where to put it in the water column. And then when they're slow to bite, you can keep it there in the water column. So like a lot of times, especially during like post spawn or pre-spawn crappies, I'll get back into the shallows and I want to get my lure in about 4 feet of water depth, but the weeds are up by 2 feet. And I want to fish it really slowly and I want to jig in place because I know exactly where they are. And I don't want to spend my time with a quick retrieve where my bait's just passing through there really quickly, because that's the only way I don't get stuck in the weeds. That's when the slip bobber is great, because I can just kind of gradually work my bait through right above the weed beds, and I can like pause and wait and see what happens, or I can fish it fast. So that's when I would use artificials underneath a slip bobber rig. Now, I know a lot of this was like a lot of technical stuff and a lot of instructions. It might not have been super fun, but if you know how to do this, like this is how I take people that haven't fished before. This is how I take them fishing. Like I know that I can get people on fish in freshwater if I get them set up with a slip float. It's really great for learning a new body of water, trying a bunch of different live baits and seeing what works. And it's also really great when you're doing like a big group, because it's tough when everybody is casting and retrieving and moving around. Like, you know, if you were to go, let's say, and I think this is a lot of you out there, you're on the pontoon with the family. It's not a fishing trip. It's also a picnic or a booze cruise or something, and you want to get a line in the water. Nobody's going to be happy about you and the 2 5-year-olds casting lures left and right. And like it gets to be nonsense. So if you're smart and you want to start working fishing in to some things that maybe weren't for fishing, a slip bobber is a really good move, because you can just kind of toss it out there and move it around when you want to. And so even if the booze cruise is, you know, parked in 20 feet of water, you can still get a bait out there and get a, you know, a foot or two off the bottom. It's just, it's good in a pinch. Anyways, that's all I've got. Go to our website to download the ebooks. Again, the freshwater ebook, the trout ebook, the walleye ebook, and our ice fishing ebook all have instructions on how to rig up the slip bobber rig. And it also kind of shows you diagrams on what baits to use and how to work the depth. I think the walleye book is really good for explaining how to use a slip float and when, because that's what I primarily use the slip float for. And so, yeah, That's all I've got for you guys today. I'm going to be coming out with an expert version next time. I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to this channel and please leave us a review. I'd really like to know what you guys like, what you don't like, what you guys want to hear. And it really helps us get our podcast out to new listeners, people that would like to learn how to fish like you're learning how to fish. So thank you so much. Bye-bye.